supply. And we want to restrict the money supply when we have high inflation and when we have high levels of growth. And we would want to lower interest rates and increase the money supply when we have low inflation and low growth and output. Yeah? And so, the Taylor rule prescribes an interest rate based on what's going on in the economy, based on what your goals are, based on what you care about most, right? If you care about output more, the growth in output, then just make this a bigger number, right? If you care about inflation more, make this a bigger number, right? And those, so again, the alphas, the A's, I should say, those are arbitrary. You make those any number you want. Ignoring for the moment the fact that interest rates are not a good reflection of whether monetary policy is tight or loose, it does seem that this rule well approximates what was going on in the Great Moderation. Indeed, we had low expected, we had expected inflation was actually higher than it was, than what the goal was, because they were printing all that money, right? So this would have actually, that part would have asked for a higher interest rate. If the inflation forecast was in fact low, which it was at some periods after the deflation, then this entire term would be negative, right? So prescribing a lower interest rate, prescribing a looser monetary policy. So if they had been following the Taylor rule, they would have printed more money in the Great Recession, right? Not just printed some and given it to the banks, but printed some and gotten it out into the economy. Finally, NGDP level targeting. So the idea is not to just target the growth in NGDP, because what if your goal is 5% NGDP growth, and one period you accidentally grow 6%? Well, what do you, like, the difficulty is, well, should you do 4% the next period to make up for the accidental overshoot of 1%, or should you just do 5%, because that's what people were expecting in the first place, and we should just say that people got lucky that first 1% increase? If you want to, it's up to you. I was getting warm. Yeah. If it gets too loud, just tell Abdullah, or you can do it. Well, the idea is we would do what's called level growth targeting, right? Or growth level targeting, depending on who you are. But the idea is pretend that's just flat. Over time, you have NGDP in dollar bills. The idea is you know what growth rate you're looking for every year, okay? And you try to hit that level based on some predetermined growth rate, right? So each of these dots is 5% more than the previous one, let's say. Clearly it's not to scale. And you try to hit it. If you came in under, that everybody knows what you're going to try to hit next period. You're going to try to hit that dot. So that means you'd be even looser next period. You try to hit the dot. And by doing that, people know exactly what you're going to do, right? You've stated ahead of time, by Federal Reserve, I'm going to hit each of these levels that is determined by some predetermined growth rate, right? Exogenous growth rate. Could be almost any number. Usually people say 4% or 5% would be good. Then they try again, right? And let's say they overshoot. That means over the following period, they're going to have tighter than they did monetary policy. And they're going to try to hit that number again, right? So the idea is they're trying to hit these dots, right, on average. Every single time they have a new particular level of NGDP that is their goal. Now, the way I've drawn this is very erratic, right? But in reality, the oscillations are about the trend would be very small. Well, what if there's a recession? That means negative real growth. Or let's just make it simple and say there's zero real growth. If we had a 5% NGDP target and we had zero real growth, what's inflation going to be? If we have zero real growth and our NGDP target is that it grows by 5% every period, what is our inflation rate going to be?
5%.
5%. so that in recessions, you don't have an NGDP drop, you just have inflation, right? And although unexpected inflation sucks for the lenders, there's no debt deflation, there's no defaults, right? Nobody ever defaulted because they had too much income, right? Yes, sir?
Do people, I mean, I guess like this kind of like goes against the point of economics where everyone acts perfectly rational. But if people just see that like their paycheck increases by 5% and during a recession, like will they continue to spend as though they're not in a recession? Like they'll just act as though they're not in a recession as long as like they're not feeling the effects of a recession in nominal terms.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So like, if I was in a recession and like an inflation and like deflation hit and my paycheck got cut in half by 30%, and maybe like maybe during a gold standard people would have responded differently, but like if I went into work and suddenly my paycheck was worth 30%, I'd be like shit and start saving money because I would expect that to happen like continuously into the future.
Maybe.
Whereas if I was in a recession and I saw my paycheck increase by 5%, even if all prices everywhere also increased by 5%
Or 10%.
or 10% or whatever, like I would maybe not respond as like, I wouldn't over
wouldn't freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that makes sense. Some people say, well, macroeconomics is not really economics, right? All the real economics is micro. But so far what I've told you, everything I've told you is strongly grounded, firmly grounded in good microeconomics. One of the determinants of demand in microeconomics is expectations, right? It's one of the things I said early on in the semester. If you expect the price to be higher tomorrow, you demand more today. You're going to be willing to pay a higher price today. If you expect prices to fall tomorrow, then you're not going to buy as much today. You're like, no, screw that, I'll just wait till tomorrow, right? And that's all that's going on here in the GDP story. Expectations are entirely appropriate to introduce into macroeconomics, especially into monetary economics. Darius, he just saw a meme he thought was really funny. Or a GIF that he thought was funny, I can't tell which. Anywho, including expectations and income into people's calculations is nothing new, right? That's all entirely appropriate for microeconomics. And that was intentional in this whole class, is to firmly ground you with microeconomic explanations for macroeconomic phenomena. All right. But yeah, people don't freak out. Their income keeps increasing, even if prices increase a little bit faster, they're not freaking out, right? They can still pay off their debts. For most people in the United States, well, I don't know, actually, I don't know the answer to this, but most people in the United States have debt, right? I can say that comfortably, I know that statistic to be true. Right? Now, what proportion it is of their total annual product, I don't know. Maybe 10%, maybe 20, maybe 30, gosh, right? But people have debt, yeah? And that's a nominal contract. And so if their income does fall, that's going to cause big problems. But if you have GDP growth, you'll never see debt deflation again. Right? Now, you may not be able to, you might default for other reasons, right? But not macroeconomic monetary reasons, right? That there are more pieces of paper, that the Federal Reserve makes a mistake, that's a crappy reason to default on your debt, right? That just sucks. There's very little you could do about it. Oh, and so if we were following NGDP level targeting, then we would have had, obviously, higher NGDP throughout this whole time, higher income. What's one of the drawbacks of NGDP targeting? Like I said, if there's no growth, you've got higher inflation, right? But only as high as your growth level target, 5% in my case. Right? If there is a recession, let's say output falls by 2%, that's a heavy recession for the United States anyway. If output falls by 2%, that means you've got 7% inflation, right? I don't see us having huge declines in output on the order of 5%, 10%. It would cause us to have 10 and 50% inflation. Right? But even if we did high inflation for a couple periods, better than defaulting on your debts, right? Happened in the Great Depression, and the Federal Reserve had no earthly idea what it was doing. Happened in the Great Recession, and the Federal Reserve certainly mismanaged things, right? But didn't fumble them royally. Like, we're not poor right now. But it would have been better if they could have avoided those defaults on debts. So the solution really is just to pick a darn rule, right? Even if the Federal Reserve said that they were going to inflation target, we already listed the reason why that might not be a good idea. right? But in this past case anyway, in the Great Recession, it would have been good because we had deflation, so they weren't following that target. So at least if they had followed that target, things would have been better. They would have loosened the monetary, policy. Okay. Not all rules are identical, right? Like we said, if you're targeting inflation, you can actually decrease growth, therefore decrease income, therefore have debt deflation. The only one of the policies that I mentioned that prevents debt deflation, which is the stuff of double-dip recessions, is NGDP targeting. Okay? But like I said, it doesn't control inflation. It controls it somewhat, but it's ultimately dependent on real output or what the level of inflation is going to be. So the idea here is just pick a darn rule and prevent uncertainty and provide certainty. Yeah? When you have accurate expectations about the future, if they target inflation, then that's how you're going to make your decisions. You're going to make your decisions based on what you expect prices to be. If they target your income, that is NGDP, that's how you're going to make your decisions. That's how you're going to make your calculation for future consumption and savings and so on. Debt, servicing, and so on. Why does uncertainty matter? Well, in my dissertation, in chapter 2 of my dissertation, I look at economic policy uncertainty, and I also look at market uncertainty. That's just all the uncertainty that doesn't have to do with government policy. Okay, so there's these two types of uncertainty, and that's the only type of uncertainty that can exist, right? That completes the set. There's uncertainty having to do with government rules, and there's everything else that I call that market uncertainty. You can call it whatever you want, non-policy uncertainty. I'm not going to show you all the steps of my dissertation, that's boring. I will show you this. These are 8 different measures of uncertainty. And so I look at, and all these pictures look pretty darn similar. I look at what does economic policy uncertainty, EPU for short. Let me just say EPU, that's economic policy uncertainty. What does EPU do to output, to industrial production? Well, it doesn't, quite frankly, doesn't look like it does very much, right? It looks like in each of these cases, maybe there's a small downward blip in the very beginning, and then the air bands take over and there's like nothing's happening, right? In this case right here, using a certain measure of uncertainty, it goes down, it comes back, then there's a lag effect later on, but even then, that's almost not significant, right? Statistically significant. So with policy uncertainty, there's a dip. And this is identifiable policy uncertainty. So this is people being aware and saying policy is uncertain. This is the effect of economic policy uncertainty on employment. In particular, this is manufacturing employment, but it's generalizable to all employment. What's weird here is that when economic policy uncertainty increases, you see increases in employment. That's weird. And I would say, oh, well, that's just this one measure of uncertainty, so it's not really generalizable, but it happens in every single one of my uncertainty measures. So, like, as much as I may not want that to be true, it seems true, right? In all my measures of uncertainty. In this case, economic policy uncertainty. What I think what's happening here is that so at firms, people are losing their job, they're quitting at a certain rate, getting fired and quitting, and they're getting hired at a certain rate. And as long as those two rates stay the same, then the amount of employment at the firm stays the same, right? You're firing people just as please you're hiring people. But then I think maybe economic policy uncertainty maybe doesn't matter so much to the firm. They just keep hiring at the rate that they were hiring, but it does matter for you and me. We have TVs, and there's a lot of politics on TV all the time. And when we see the government waffling on their policy, we're like, well, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Maybe I don't quit. So now the attrition rate falls. Right? So now the rate at which people are quitting from their job falls. They're hiring people at the same rate, which means the total amount of employment is going to increase briefly until the firms adjust so they don't hire too many people. They don't want all those people, right? So there's a short blip in employment, goes up when there's more economic policy uncertainty, then it goes back down, right? Very short-lived results. This is market uncertainty. So in market uncertainty, that's where there's still room for government here, right? It's just the type of uncertainty that people can't attribute to the government explicitly, right? So this is like monetary policy and things like that. So what we see happening now here we see some differences between the different measures. The measures that I like are this guy, this U3, U12, and U1. Those are just code names. Code name we see a decrease in output. This is industrial production. This is output. We see a decrease in output. Here we see a decrease, but then like an overshoot. But every single one of these, except for this one up here, we see a decrease in output, a significant decrease in output. Right, in this one, there's a decrease, then an increase, and then it tapers off. But in all of them, except for that first one, you see a significant and prolonged decrease in output, merely due to uncertainty in the economy. Right, this is not the federal funds rate is not doing this. Employment is not having this effect. CPI is not having this effect. The S&P 500 level is not having this effect. The thing which is doing it is uncertainty. This is the effect of market uncertainty on employment. So again, Federal Reserve, money supply, that kind of stuff could be in here, right? To the extent that interest rates are not always attributable to the Federal Reserve, which I said they weren't always. So what we see is, using this measure, we see a decrease in employment. Using this measure, we see a decrease in employment. This one looks like nothing's going on. Here, a decrease in employment, decrease in employment. This one, maybe a decrease in employment. This one, not a whole lot. There's a little bit of an increase. Not a whole lot. The story I see here, regardless of whether things get good or get bad due to uncertainty, right? And this makes sense. Things can get good or bad with uncertainty, right? Because sometimes you trick people and output increases, and sometimes you can't trick people and they just get freaked out and they stop producing as much. Point being here, though, is that uncertainty has an effect, right? That's the point here. It seems to me that it has a negative effect overall, and the effect is bigger for market uncertainty than it is for economic policy uncertainty, in my opinion, or according to the numbers anyway, not my opinion. As much as I would love, as a George Mason economist, I'd love to say, oh man, it's all the government's fault, right? It's not all the government's fault. There's other stuff in the economy, right, that's more important than the government. And that seems sensible, right? Like the government it is a big part of your life, the government, like on a daily basis. I mean, you do what you do, right? You go to the grocery store, you come to school, go to work. And that stuff matters more to you than what the government's saying. Whole point here, however, is that uncertainty matters, therefore certainty matters, accurate expectations matter. The Federal Reserve picking a rule makes it accountable, which is part of why it hasn't picked a rule, right? Congress hasn't enforced on it a rule, because if you give a rule to the Federal Reserve, suddenly you can measure whether it's been compliant with that rule or not, right? If it was an inflation target, we can say, look, you haven't been doing your job, you're fired. That's a problem for them. If it was an NGDP target, we can say, look, you haven't been doing your job, clearly we've seen the numbers, you're fired, right? It would put a lot of political pressure on the Federal Reserve if they were seen to be missing their goals repeatedly. So really quickly, and then we're going to take a break. I'm going to show you CPI. It's monthly seasonally adjusted. And the units are compound annual rate of change. Well, let's change that to semi-annual. That's okay. Oh, here we are. Let's get in the right period of time. This only goes to 2017. What's up with that? Oh, because it's not semi-annual. That's fine. So in 2011, we had over 2% inflation. But large, except for this one blip here, maybe this one as well, this recovery, inflation has been below 2%. Here, like hit just 2%. Recently, they've been doing a better job, but inflation's been pretty consistently below 2%. So they found that if you've heard that target maybe on TV or in other classes, they haven't been hitting it. Right, this is semi-annual, so let's see what happens when we change it to monthly. Monthly, their averages, oh here, let's zoom in. I think we can zoom in. Yeah, the average has been well below. Here, we had deflation again in some months. Oh, significant, wow. We've had, the average is well below 2%. Like I said, recently we've been doing okay. Maybe the average has been 2%, but Yeah, the average has not been 2%. So the Federal Reserve is failing when they say that that's their target. And then you were asking what the rate was.
I looked it up, it was
reserves.
1.75. That's
Oh,
what the,
yeah, I want to show the graph. What did you search to get?
I just Googled the Federal Reserve. They say it on their website. I couldn't find it on Fred.
Interest rate on excess reserves, starting in 2008. So now it's 1.75, like you said. So apparently let's increase the time span. Yeah, they were printing money, but then paying the banks to not lend out money, which is totally compliant with their third mandate, right? Financial stability, financial sector stability, financial sector regulation. Not so compliant with maintaining a low unemployment rate, not so compliant as we saw with maintaining stable inflation. So we're not saying they're stupid. I'm not saying they're stupid, right? I'm not going to argue that. Sometimes I'll argue, but not right now anyway. They had 3 goals. They chose one of them, ultimately. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the presentation? Okay. Or about the stabilization policies that I mentioned, the solutions?
I got a question. So, wouldn't an argument in favor of inflation that I kind of thought of when you were talking is that so assuming that people are generally risk averse and they would prefer to not lose wages rather than gain wages, as a rule of thumb, economists say that people would rather not lose something than gain something.
I mean, that's only true recent, in the last 100 years, right? Prior to that, they were very comfortable.
Okay.
So that's a manifestation of our institutions. That's all.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. There's nothing inherent in people about that.
Don't they do the study with the coffee cups and
Yeah, there's
the pens and stuff like
those.
that?
So all those of you who are interested in experimental economics and behavioral economics, you should use your economic skills to inform the results that you see, not use the results that you see to inform your economic theory, right? So there's these examples that, when you change the price by 1 cent, it doesn't really change how much people are willing to buy, but when you make it from 1 cent to 0, people buy a whole lot because it's free, something. But people just like free stuff, right? And in the short run, people are allowed to be irrational. We're irrational all the time, right? Was it not Mike? Mike is not here. Mr. Biggs. He was saying he doesn't really like peanut chews, but he can't stop himself from eating them. He doesn't know why, right? In the short run, sure, right? But in the long run, he'll stop it, right? So in the long run, people act as if they're rational. I'm not going to say that they are, but in the short run, we got all kinds of ways that we satisfy these urges that we have, right? We've got urges for when I was a kid, I was kind of afraid of the dark, but not entirely. So I would wake up in the middle of the night, go to the restroom, and before I left the restroom, I was like, all right, here we go. If I make it back to bed before I count to 10 seconds, the monsters don't get me. And I'd turn out the restroom and run to my bedroom and jump into bed and be like, whew, 1 second away, right? Because you just count more slowly, right? If you're running out of time. And in the short run, that's stupid, right? That's stupid. There's no other word for it. You're being silly. And people satisfy these urges that they have, right? Sometimes they're moral things, right? We satisfy these moral urges. People will harm themselves in order to punish somebody else, right? But that's not because we're irrational, like some of the experimental results would say. It's rather that we value something else that's not being observed in the experiment, right? So be careful. Thank you for bringing that up. That's just worth mentioning generally. Interpret any experimental results with the lens of economics, not interpret theory with the results. Right? That's all. All right, let's take a break. Let's take a break, and we'll come back and answer any questions, anything like that. Mr. Brown had a question. My daughter, she's less than 1 year old. She has a book called Mr. Brown Can Moo, Can You? Can you move, Mr. Brown? I'm not asking you to move. All right. So you had a question. I have not really addressed, quite frankly, this whole semester, much about the Austrian business cycle theory. And being at George Mason, you ought to have heard it at least once, I suppose. The reason I haven't gone over it is I don't think it's been rigorously demonstrated as true. Now, part of what they prescribe is that what happens is before there are recessions, there are bubbles that come up before a recession, then the recession is just a popping of a bubble, essentially. Okay. The way it's been metaphorized is you pluck a guitar string, and you have this initial up and then a down, right, when it oscillates. Part of the idea of the Austrian business cycle theory is that credit becomes cheap, it's easy to borrow, and so you invest in, you make investments that similarly will produce very little going forward, right? They produce enough to pay off this low interest rate, but if interest rates rise, maybe to their natural rate or whatever, but if interest rates rise, then you will realize that these not very profitable investments that were profitable at low interest rates are not profitable at all at high interest rates, and they become unproductive investments. And those, one might say, should default, okay? However, default again has the problem of debt deflation. And when banks see their loans default, Mr. Brown had asked, well, isn't default a good thing? That means you take all of that malallocation of resources and you reallocate it elsewhere, right? Okay. And the answer is not that default is good. The answer is that somebody hurts, right? It's a question of who's going to hurt here. The bank does not want a person to default, and the person does not want to lose their investment, both of them. Rather, just like with bankruptcy, it would be better if the debtor, whoever borrowed the money, could pay back some amount rather than nothing at all. Okay. The idea being is that what they have invested is a sunk cost, but it could still be productive with a little bit more investment, right? Not as productive, but it could still be somewhat productive. And so if the bank takes a small hit, takes a lower interest rate, right, instead of a high interest rate, they're willing to take a low interest rate, then they're the ones who feel the bulk of that hit. And you might even argue that we can talk about shoulds. We can get normative and say, oh, maybe they should be the ones to take the hit because they're the ones who said it was a good investment in the first place, right? They provided the loan. But more importantly, the default can cause the money supply to contract ultimately and lead to a second dip in the recession. And that's not what we want. So it's maybe better to have some small misallocation of capital and banks to take a hit rather than for banks to go belly up. And many people go out of business and the money supply contracting. So I think that's a more nuanced answer. So the people who would say, no, we should have more defaults, or no, we shouldn't print money and let prices adjust, gosh darn it. And indeed, that's what Friedrich von Hayek suggested early on in the recession. I shouldn't say that, early on in the Depression. He said, no, just let prices adjust, it'll all work out. But he was running under gold standard rules, gold standard norms, right? So in his mind, no, it'll all come back, it'll be okay, prices will come back up, wages will come back up. But with the Federal Reserve, gold standard rules are out the window. And he did admit later on that advice that he gave was wrong. He at his older age, came to support something similar to NGDP targeting over his lifetime. Same thing with Milton Friedman. Both of them, as they got older, wanted something closer and closer to NGDP targeting, which is what Scott Sumner supports now. And quite frankly, I think is on balance the best idea. It doesn't prevent recessions, but it will ameliorate them and prevent double dips due to monetary factors. So that's what I got to say to the Austrian business cycle and the prescription of defaults. Defaults are a very serious thing, right? They gave us the Great Depression, they gave us the Great Recession. Any other questions about anything I've covered today so far? I'm going to cover something else, and then with the last 15 minutes, I guess, I'll give you evaluations to fill out.
So this one, I just missed it in my notes. You had price level from, it was a big spike from 1916 to 1922.
Yeah,
Very first
yeah,
slide.
yeah.
And you said what the reason, I just didn't catch it.
Oh, I mean, my supply is clearly increasing. Why is it doing that? I don't know why it's doing that. All right. Money,
Yeah, just that hill.
yeah, the money supply is clearly increasing, and really that's the bottom line, is it's increasing, right? And then it doesn't go back down. People continue to transact because they've got gold standard thinking, and so they're like, oh man, this is, and it just stays high, right? And so it goes a bit down here, but it stays high. And so this is why people thought the 20s were an awesome time, right? It's just our incomes go up. That's fantastic, right? When I was in 3rd grade, we were taught we produced too much in the 20s, and we couldn't consume it all, so we had the Great Depression, right? Output had to fall so that we could catch up. But that's wrong, right? But that's all that is. That's money supply increasing, right? And people being okay with it because it stayed high, which must mean they had higher incomes, they were more productive. That's all. Is there any other question about any other slide or era or policy or concept that I presented today?
Is debt deflation really that bad when you have like, if we do have deflation, then it will just be kind of, a lot of the effect will just kind of be a transfer between creditors and debtors. Like, it's really great to be a lender when deflation happens. Even though, yes, you lose some business with some people defaulting, but you're collecting more.
So there's two issues. If your income falls, then there's default.
Yeah.
But part of the way our monetary system in the United States works is that the money supply is augmented by loans. And so if you allow loans to default, then you're constricting the money supply further, right? Because the banks can't immediately turn around and make another loan. They have to wait for time to build up and capital to build up, money to build up. So it's not only that income creates defaults, but lower income creates defaults, which then leads to lower income. It constricts the money supply further. And so that alone, it seems to me, is, yes, they're a very big deal. But even to address your point about it merely being a transfer, banks specialize. They do something. They provide a useful service for us, and that service is intermediation, right? They connect savers and borrowers, right? And they take people who don't know how to lend out money, and they lend it to people in the way that they hope will be profitable, right? That's the job that they do for us. But they do not produce things otherwise, right? Whereas the people who default ostensibly were producing things, businesses were producing things. So output does go down. And so by letting those debts default, we are in fact decreasing output of other things, other productive parts of the economy. This is not to say that financial intermediation is not productive. It certainly is, right? But at that point, you're making a utilitarian argument saying, well, maybe intermediation, the only way this would make sense is if, let's say, intermediation increases a bunch, and then defaults only lead to a small change in output, right? But that's not what actually, it's quite the opposite, in fact. Right? Intermediation only changes a little bit, it even goes down, right? The intermediation even goes down because there's not as much borrowing and lending, and output would fall a great deal more if defaults were allowed to occur. So yes, it's a big deal. For the first reason, I think is adequate enough, but if you're going to be utilitarian about things, the second reason I think has a conclusion in the same direction. Does that suffice? Like, do you feel like now, oh, no, it is a big deal, or I mean, that's what my professor says.
Yeah, it's convincing.
It's convincing. Okay, that's cool. If it's not, that's fine too.
I just have an instinct against disliking inflation like savings, even though.
You have an instinct against inflation?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's common, right? Many people who are not economists think, oh man, inflation is bad, right? Because they're thinking about prices, they're also thinking about incomes. Yeah. Some people argue that it would be difficult to target NGDP because there's long and variable lags in determining, is policy action necessary? What kind of policy action? Let's actually take the policy action, and then it has to actually be taken, and then money takes time to permeate through the economy, and we don't even know if we can target NGDP. But I don't think that's quite right. If we could target inflation, which I think we can as well, then we can definitely target NGDP, because as it turns out, we don't know. We don't measure all the stuff and then measure all the prices, and then multiply them together to get end GDP, that's a theoretical construct. It's true, but it's a theoretical construct. Rather, in real life, we observe end GDP, and we deflate it by prices to get an estimate of our GDP, right? There's the GDP deflator, right? That's what's happening in real life. So in real life, we can see end GDP. That's not a problem holding us back. It doesn't take us time, a whole lot of time, to calculate end GDP and figure out what to do. So it's a very practical solution. It's a very simple solution, right? But like I said, politically, it's a problem. It's a major problem. It would require the Federal Reserve to be accountable, and the Federal Reserve doesn't want that. They want independence. Any other questions about today? I encourage you to do a Google search on the Taylor rule, just to find out what the parameters mean. Maybe I'll ask you a question generally about the Taylor rule. I know I didn't give them to you here, but that's okay, because I know you can Google it, and it's the Wikipedia page is entirely adequate. I'm not going to ask you super complicated questions. Not on the exam, anyway. Okay, in the next 20 minutes, talk about spaghetti graphs. We're not going to get too spaghetti-y, but they will be graphs. More like I was a fringe economist if it was just me and Scott Sumner who believed in GDP targeting. But Ben Bernanke said it himself, right? That's part of what makes me feel like I'm not crazy, right? MB is equal to PY. You don't need to know logs for this class, right? We found out how to find the marginal utility and marginal product with logs, but other than that, you don't really need much to do. I'm just going to tell you, if you take the log of both sides, that's the same thing as saying ln m plus ln v is equal to ln P plus ln y. That happens to be true mathematically. It's an algebraic concept. This is not an algebra class. If we assume that the log of velocity is just 0, okay, that's the easiest assumption to make. We can assume it's some other number, right? It just makes the graphs more difficult, so we're just going to assume it's 0. We're going to assume that money is neutral. Money is neutral. Here we have time, and we've got we're measuring log units on the y-axis. So that over time, and that's upward sloping because it is. Let's say that that's log of the money supply. That's an M, log money supply. Okay. Well, let's say that output is neutral. Okay. And then, therefore, the level of the money supply doesn't really matter, right? So let's just say for the moment that the growth rate of real output is just constant, right? Let's just make that 0 slope over time. That's ln of y. Well, if there comes some point in time, t star, let's say, and let's say the money supply doubles, right, or goes up. right? But the growth rate, the slope here stays the same as it was previously. Pretend that's the same. So this is the same as this. Okay. Reminder, this is still ln of money supply. This is ln of output. The only thing we don't have here is
What does X stand for?
a given variable. Yeah, so natural log of m, natural log of y, natural log of whatever.
Thank you.
Well, we don't. We've already assumed velocities. The log of velocities is going to be 0 to make life easy. Okay, it doesn't have to be that assumption. It just makes things easy. Then prices are going to grow at the same rate as the money supply grows. Okay? When you have a straight line in logs, a sloped straight line, that's the same thing as exponential growth. Okay. So this is like growing at some rate, this is growing at some rate that's the same rate. And if money is neutral, then real output shouldn't be changed, because here the growth rate of the money supply didn't change, just suddenly doubled once and it continued growing at the same rate. Right? So the level of the money supply changed, but the growth rate did not. Well, that just means that prices, which is this guy, LNP, he is also going to jump to about there. Continue growing at the same slope, LNP, right? So that a single discrete jump in the money supply, if money is neutral, should result in just a jump in prices, and prices will continue to grow as they did previously if output remains constant. This is money is neutral. We can draw the same graph, so go ahead and reproduce that graph without without things after time t star. If money is not neutral, not. Okay. So we still have output changing all the way up to time t star, and we've got money supply increasing at some rate all the way up to t star. That's ln m, ln y here, right? We're just reproducing things. And this is, by the way, I didn't mention this, although money is neutral here, this is a surprise change, right? Surprise. If money is not neutral, and suddenly there is a discrete jump, but the rate stays the same, then what's going to happen? Maybe, if, now this is by construction, we've held velocity constant, right? Things will be a little bit different if velocity is allowed to be flexible. We've held velocity constant. We're going to see a brief spike in output, but it's going to come back, right? Because nothing ultimately will change in the long run. We know that, right? That means that temporarily prices will not adjust, but they will ultimately adjust here so that they're at the same rate. Growing at the same rate as they did previously, growing at this rate right here. Such that if I drew this perfectly, we would still get ln y plus ln p would give us the natural log of L, would give us ln m if I drew this perfectly, right? So this goes up, this doesn't go up, it starts to come down, prices start to go up, and it reaches its new level. Same path, same slope, I should say, as previously. Not to scale, but pretty good, I think. Yeah? We go. also do, what if, we could also change the growth rate of the money supply. And we're going to assume super neutrality. So neutrality says that output doesn't change in response to a change in the level of the money supply. Super neutrality says that output doesn't change in response to a change in the growth rate of the money supply. So again, we're going to have ln m, it'll grow at some rate, and then we're going to have it start growing faster. ln m. Again, time, and this occurs at time t. And again, output is constant, and then it'll remain constant because money is super neutral. ln of lowercase y. You'll see prices staying right along with the money supply until time t. But even then, it will remain along with the money supply. So this is ln prices, right? Where this slope and this slope are the same, and this slope and this slope are the same. This right here is the same as saying, oh, there's a vertical short run supply curve.